What's up guys, Manny from Motomillion, and our Ducati is still leaking. So guys, the bike is unfortunately still leaking. We did a video showing us fixing the leak. We had our fingers or toes crossed as I said it. It's still leaking. And so let me mention this. We followed the exact same procedure that Ducati wanted us to follow as per the service manual to reseal the oil pan. We resealed it. I took it for a ride. I believe 650E was in town, and I was really eager to ride this bike since I think it's one of the most exciting bikes that we have on our fleet to ride. And when we came back, we realized that the oil pan had a bunch of oil in it. Right away, I didn't blame anything about the bike. I said, okay, we did something wrong, but when we inspected it further, the leak is exactly at the same spot, which means it's not us. Because imagine if you have a leak somewhere on your oil pan, you reseal it, it's almost impossible to replicate the leak unless you deliberately not put the silicone gasket maker on the area. But we followed the exact procedure that Ducati wanted. It's leaking from the same spot, which leads us to believe there's something wrong, hopefully with the oil pan and not the block of the motorcycle. And let me also mention this, we're not the only people experiencing these issues. We've heard numerous people comment on our oil leak fixed video that their bike was leaking too. Some of them were SP2s, some of them were just Panigale V4s because they share the same engine and the same oil pan. And also, I'm not sure if Jared Campisi made a video about it, but unfortunately his brand new Lamborghini Street Fighter V4 is leaking around the same spot, and his bike only had 16 miles because I know some of you guys commented saying that it's the way that we break bikes in and stuff like that, which to me is a bunch of noise. It's nonsense. Your break-in procedure is not going to cause your bike to leak oil unless you blow up your motor, which is not what we do in terms of our break-in procedures. But long story short, it's still leaking, and let me show you guys what we have come up with to try to fix the leak, because as of now there is no official word from Ducati to say, hey, there's something messed up, or hey, there is a technical service bulletin or a recall on these things. But we're going to attempt to try to see how we could fix it, and let me show you what we got done. Guys, this is a gasket. This is what the Ducati doesn't have. Well, it has a gasket, but it's a silicone gasket maker that you squeeze around it. It is often hard to work with, especially someone like me who doesn't do it every day. But if you're somebody who builds an engine and is using a gasket maker, it's probably second nature to you. But in this case, I don't think it's the fault of the gasket maker. There has to be a problem with the tolerances between the bottom of the block or the oil pan. And as you guys can see, we have two oil pans here, not one, but two. I ordered two oil pans for this bike just in case maybe one batch was defective. And as I mentioned, there's a bunch of people who are having these problems now. And this is what we came up with. This is a gasket. It's a special gasket made by a company here in the US. We sent them our oil pan, and we got this tip from a friend of ours who used to take care of Kawasaki's super bikes. I believe it was in the 90s or 80s over in Asia. And they had a long, like, I don't know the exact details. He told me, but I forgot. But they had some issues with leaking engines, and this is the only way that they could have it fixed. It was the same thing. They were using gasket makers, the liquid gasket makers on the bikes, and they couldn't come up with a solution until they found this gasket right over here. What's special about it is that it's metal and it's got sponge on two sides. When I hold it, there is a thickness to it that I could feel. It's 0.7 of a millimeter, which is almost nothing. Probably as much as a nail, or just a little more than what your nail would be. But when you squeeze this, when you torque it down, it gets squeezed. It goes down to 0.2 or 0.3 of a millimeter, which should be acceptable, that it's not going to add too much height to our oil pan. And if you take a look at it, it will fit into here, into an exact shape once we put it in. And hopefully this is what's going to fix the leak. As I mentioned, there's no official word from Ducati yet about the leaking bikes. I don't know if there's a lot of them, but there is enough for some of you guys to comment and for us to hear from our customers that they had some leaking issues. But yeah, it's that time. I got to take this whole thing apart again. Well, as long as the exhaust goes and everything else goes, and put this on there. Let's see if it's going to leak. Exhaust is off, guys. I think I wasn't timing myself, and I don't really care about how fast I do it, but that was pretty quick. And maybe quicker than the YouTube magic that it took 10 seconds, but all jokes aside, now we're gonna drain our oil. And as you guys can see, we have this leak in the same exact area running down. Let me move this out of the way so maybe we can get a better visual. It's the exact same place that we have the leak. And let's see. What I'm doing with the marker is that, guys, some of the bolts are short like this one, and some of the bolts are longer like this one. Wherever the long bolts come out, I'm marking the oil pan. I'm not going to reuse this oil pan anyways. That way it gives me an easy reference to know where it goes when we're putting it back together. It's always in the service manual. Well, I think the service manual doesn't actually show it. It's in the parts catalog that you got to take a look at the different part numbers for these bolts. But this kind of saves time in that regard. Here's our oil pan off. At a first glance, it looks just the same as the one that went on there in terms of the gasket and the materials around it. I just want to take a look to see if there's anything evident here, but not really. Well, you guys know what time it is. I got to clean off all the gasket material that's left behind, transfer over the casing for the oil filter, swap the filter over and put it back on the bike. Hopefully, it'll be as easy as it came off. One thing I didn't show you guys when we were fixing it, or we're trying to fix it the first time around, guys, is these abrasive pads that we have. These are scouring pads. You have to be very careful when you're cleaning the bottom of this. You could use solvents and stuff, but if you've ever tried to get some of this gasket material off, you know how persistent it is on staying on there. And we're going to be using the scouring pad that we have here. I tested it on the oil pan that had the material on it that we took off to make sure, because these are machine surfaces down here. You don't want to change the thickness of it at all, because then you'll have more problems with the leaking. So I have this. I'm going to try to clean up whatever that I couldn't clean up with our plastic razor blade. And then I think we're going to be ready to put on the new oil pan and our new gasket. Now that the bottom of the block is all cleaned up, we got our new gasket that we had made, a brand new oil pan that is beautiful and clean. We're still going to wipe this down before we put it on there. And yes, we did use new bolts, guys. I know someone's going to ask, did you use new bolts? Coincidentally, when we bought this motorcycle from Ducati Detroit, they sent us an oil change kit, but also, for whatever reason, they sent us brand new oil pan bolts too. I don't know. Maybe they saw it coming. We have no idea. It's a very funny coincidence. It's kind of convenient too. But let me get this on the bike, and then let's put it all back together. Then hopefully, the misery of this bike is solved. Okay guys, so I have the oil pan in place with the new gasket. I made sure that I didn't tighten any of these bolts. I just hand tightened them to the point that I know that it's not going to change the torque value. But I have my service manual right here. It tells me the sequence of torque and tightening it. And we're going to go through all the bolts, tighten it, put everything back together. And before I put the belly pan on the bike, what we're going to do is we're going to pull it out, start it, let it warm up, and see if it could see any leaks that are present. And then we'll pull it back in, let it cool down. And then again, we'll be monitoring it to see if there's any leaks throughout the time that while it sits here, while it's cooling down. Because don't forget, when oil is cold, it's thicker and it might not leak, but you might get a leak when it gets thinner, when it gets hot to the operating temperature. That's why we want to start it off, but also it's going to start pumping the oil through the system. Then again, with the oil pan, I don't think you need it to pump through it. That's not the problem. The problem is the oil that sits there is leaking through the bike. But let's get to it. Let's torque this down. Let's get it put back together. And I'm really, really wondering if we actually solved the issue or not. So guys, the torque spec is 3 to 3.5 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. I have my phone here because I took a picture of the tightening sequence and it shows it from looking down to up. So it's not going to get confusing, because it does get pretty confusing when they change the way around and when you're looking from bottom up. So here goes nothing, guys. Guys, we're also running a new oil filter. Obviously, I know that the bike maybe did 50 miles since the last time we touched the oil. That was when we changed our gasket on the oil pan. I'm still going to use a new oil filter because it's kind of silly not to, even though we know it's super low miles. And you need a new oil filter and the new gaskets for your filter housing cover, which is this piece. And these are also available as the part of the oil change kit through Motomillion.com as well. Okay guys, now that everything is on, we have our new filter. We put our drain plug back on, and if you guys didn't notice, that's the stall bus drain plug. I'm going to take alcohol and a clean shop towel. I'm going to wipe everything down. That way, if we see something that's wet or something that has oil on it, we know that it wasn't there when we finished putting everything together, so that it's a good reference point to know that, you know, you're not second guessing saying, was there oil there? Did we leave oil there? So I'm going to wipe everything down, and then I'm going to go back into assembly with the exhaust system, and I think we should be good to go. Obviously, I'm going to fill the oil too. Guys, we did it. Exhaust is on. It looks somewhat like a Panigale V4. It's missing oil. We're gonna fill up the oil right now and then pull the bike out, start it up, hear this beast roar once more time, and then we're gonna check for any kind of leaks that might be happening because of the oil pan. And I guess we'll wrap it up there once we find nothing wrong with it. But let me put the oil on and let's continue on. We did start the bike to let the oil pump run that oil through the engine. The bike's been sitting for about an hour. The sight glass is showing no oil now. Before it was showing that it was even overfilled. Now I'm going to add a little more. That way we're sure that there is the proper level of oil somewhat. We'll pull the bike out. We'll let it get to the operating temperature. And then again, we're going to let it sit for about an hour or two before we make a final decision on how much oil is in the bike. But right now we're going to be even more careful when we fill it. We don't want to overfill it. We want to get it to the maximum point that it's indicated on our manual, which is between the two lines that are on your sight glass. And then, you know, once we have to make some adjustments afterwards when it runs again, we'll do that after. The bike's outside. The Miami sun is in full effect. It's like 4 or 5 in the afternoon, but it's just amazingly hot. But let me just start this thing up. Let it warm up a little more. What I'm doing there is I'm slowly revving it with very, very low revs. It's a way to get the bike to warm up a little faster without revving it too high. But we'll just let it be, we'll let it idle, and then we'll check back when it's fully warmed up. So the fans are running. We know that the bike is fully warmed up. I just want to mention something here, guys. There's no faking it here. Look at the color of these pipes. The bike only has 450 miles and they've blued out so nicely. I think we were all awed by how nice it looks, because sometimes things can look a little bit dull inside our studio where we just have some lights up and it's all white light. But outside, this thing looks stunning. And don't forget, it's usually covered up by our belly pan too. But let's see if it's fixed. It's the next day, guys. As you saw, we did start the bike and let it fully warm up, and it's been sitting overnight. I'm happy to report, first thing I did this morning when I got in was to come and check to make sure that there is no puddles underneath. And I did a quick glance around the bike to see if there is any leaks whatsoever. And as far as I could tell, we cleaned everything up really nicely with alcohol. As you saw, there are no leaks whatsoever. And obviously this wasn't our side that was causing our issues. It's on the other side of the bike. And as far as I can see, it looks pretty dry. And that's a really good sign. That means that we could chug along with this beautiful bike over here. Yes, I really want to ride the bike. And next, I think for this bike is going to be, I want to change the sprocket setup on it just to see if it could shave some weight. There's a couple other small details that I really want to touch on this motorcycle before I officially call it a finished project for Motomillion. But even before that, I think once we do the 520 conversion kit, I want to put the belly pan back on it, take it for an extended ride so that we could see if any of the riding conditions that we do cause it to leak. Because right now, I think we're halfway there by saying it's not leaking. I really want to take it out for a ride and come back and double check everything to make sure if it's good or not. And I hope this is going to be the end of our leaking Ducati saga that we have, because all our other bikes have been very, very good for us. All the recent Ducatis we've had. This is an outlier, but I also want to mention, if you guys are having some issues with a similar bike, which we heard on our comments, then we could offer you guys those gaskets that we had specially made so that it could be a fix, easy fix actually. It's a lot easier than applying that silicone bead around your oil pan. But either way, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Until next time, guys, have a good one.